Okay. Who has questions?
Okay, so for so it starts off with we have to know that there's in the nervous system the central and the peripheral, and then we got to break it down.
Yep. So how we organize the nervous system. Yep.
Okay. And also, what is it? You know, the vesicle, how the development of the nervous system, how it starts with the ectoderm and the neural plate and all that.
Yeah.
We need to know specifically all the steps.
Specifics? No. Nope. Just the nervous system starts as a tube. It's really, yeah, we're not going to the details. The details were just to help you kind of see how we ended up with the organization of the brain and the spinal cord.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to know any of that detail.
Okay. That's okay. The blood-brain barrier. Was a little confused with that.
Okay.
What specifically do we need to know? Just that, like, it's selectively permeable, or do we need to know that it requires glucose, that it's amino acids, and
so yeah. So for the blood-brain barrier, because all of these things are kind of key to how the nervous system stays separate, you want to know the components of it. You want to know what can and can't get through. You don't need to know every single thing that can pass through, but there were categories that we discussed. So if you know the categories, that should be sufficient.
Okay. The 4 neurotransmitter groups. There's 4 of them, and then we need to know each one in detail, or just like the name?
No, just the group. So you don't need to know any of the details. Like, you don't need to know the specific examples. The specific examples were just to help you remember the groups. So yeah, you just need to know it at the group level. Okay, so Montserrat wants to know about the ascending pathway. So yeah, give me one sec. Let me pull up the pictures. I'm pretty sure it's that one. There it is. Okay. Okay, so when we talk about pathways, we're basically looking at the connections between, so we're talking about ascending pathways. Let me not make this more complicated. We're looking at the connections between the sensory reception and getting to the cerebral cortex. Okay, so pathways are all about the connections between the peripheral nervous system and the cerebrum, so the highest levels of the brain. And so that's how we get this set up. So in order to get from sensory stimulation up, it takes 3 neurons. All right. So we name them by the order in which we get there. So the first order neuron is the sensory neuron. And the sensory neurons have, remember, these are the guys that have their cell bodies in those dorsal root ganglia. And they're the ones whose dendrites are either acting as receptors or occasionally connected to a receptor. But mostly we're thinking about them as the actual sensory receptors. Okay. So their little dendrites are detecting something. and then the signal gets sent down their axon. Cell body happens to be here. And when it gets to the spinal cord, it's going to synapse. So that's synapsing with our second order neurons. So the second order neurons are spinal cord neurons, mostly. There are some in the brainstem as well. So that's typically happening in that dorsal horn, because remember the dorsal horn's got sensory neurons in it. And so then the axon of this is going to go up to the thalamus. And on the way to the thalamus, the second order neuron is going to cross over to the other side of the brain. All right, so then the third neuron is in the thalamus, and that's how we're able to send that information to the right part of the cerebrum, because remember we have somatotopy in the cerebrum where all the information is organized in kind of a map of the body. So the crossing over so that we're always controlling the opposite side of the body, and the somatotopy get kind of mediated at the level of the thalamus, and then it's going to go to whichever part of the cerebrum it's supposed to go to based on what type of sensory information it is and where in the body it's coming from. So again, first order from the peripheral nervous system into the spinal cord, and then we're synapsing in the spinal cord. Second order neuron crosses over and synapses in the thalamus. The thalamus directs the sensory information to the appropriate part of the brain, or the cerebrum. It's already in the brain. Any other questions about the pathways while we're here? All right, what else? So the short answer questions are going to be a selection of things. I'm going to try to pick one or two topics from each lecture. And generally, I go by what is in the learning objectives. So you've seen the questions I've asked before. They're going to be similar. We're going to be concentrating on the, what do you call it? Critical thinking type questions. You might not all get a question from each lecture necessarily, because it'll be sort of that five questions worth 4 points each. And, you know, I'm doing them as test banks. So I put in more questions than you're getting, and then you get a random selection of them. So I can't guarantee that you'll get one from each topic, but I'm putting them in from all of those. So, you know, they're going to be a lot of how or why questions. So it's important that when you're getting these short answer questions, you're thinking about what is actually being asked. I don't want a definition of what something is just because that word happens to be in the question, for example. That's not it. So make sure you're answering the question asked. I can't really give you more information than that. Basically, the idea is that if you've been studying the information that's on the test, you should be able to answer the questions.
Okay, and then for the glial cells, know the types and their functions?
Exactly, yeah. So you want to know what their name is, where they're located, right? Because there's a very sharp division. We have 4 in the CNS and 2 in the PNS. So make sure you know which one's which, and then know what their job is.
For the memory part of it, you just want us to know a little like definitions or, the short term and long term.
Yeah, it doesn't, we're not getting into the nitty gritty. We didn't have time, first of all, and yeah.
Like you don't want to know 7 to 8 chunks and 5% is held in the STM and all that. Just
no.
Short term, long term. Okay. And the types of memory: declarative, procedural, motor, and emotion.
Yeah. So basically, just the definitions of the basics.
Okay. And for the sleep part, also the same thing. Know that there's different types of sleep cycles.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really, to the level of detail we covered, it's just what REM is versus non-REM.
Mm-hmm. And then for the spinal cord anatomy, how would you be asking those questions?
So for the spinal cord anatomy, mostly looking at the functional divisions. I'm saving the details of the anatomy for the lab stuff because we're covering it more in lab.
For their functions and their name.
Yeah. Yeah, function, organization. And again, remember, some of the stuff on there is more detail than we actually covered. So don't worry about like specific tracts running through the white matter or anything like that. Okay, we covered the basics. And then, the same type of anatomy that we covered for the brain, the protective layers and stuff like that.
For the receptor level processing, so know what is it? So the two types and what they are, like one's fast adapting, one's slow.
Yeah, so yeah, the phasic versus non-phasic. Yeah, so just, yeah, understanding what that means. And then I would say you should know which one's which, but really the key there is the non-phasics are just nociceptors for pain and proprioceptors for body position and movement. So as long as you know that, everything else is phasic.
So the difference between somatic and what is it?
Autonomic.
Is visceral the same thing as autonomic, or
yes,
am I off?
they are. Okay. Yep, visceral and autonomic are the same thing.
Okay. So the the somatic, is that like the one that's conscious? Are you conscious that you're doing, or?
Sort of. So the real difference is that the somatic nervous system deals with skeletal muscle as the effectors, and the visceral or autonomic deals with smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands.
Okay.
But what that means for like sensory input is that the somatic deals with everything to do with the musculoskeletal and skin. So if you kind of think about the body as like this framework housing a bunch of soft internal organs, the framework of bone and muscle and skin is somatic, and all the internal organs inside our body cavities are visceral.
Okay. So. Now we got to know the difference between afferent and efferent.
Yes.
Neuron.
Yes. So make sure you keep that in mind. And remember that efferent and effectors go together, right? So the effectors are the muscles and glands that respond to the nervous system, and they're being told what to do by the efferent pathways.
Okay, so those are from the central nervous system to the...
Yep. Yep, out through the peripheral to the effectors.
For the reflexes, we need to know the categories, like monosynaptic versus poly.
Yeah. So that's all vocabulary related to the reflexes. You should know that. And then if we covered the reflex in detail, then it's fair game for the test. I'm not going to expect you to remember like every single detail. I'm not going to be like, which one was monosynaptic? But as far as like using them as example to ask you about them, so if you study them so that you're more familiar with them, it'll just make it easier to answer reflex questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What's the difference between segmental versus intersegmental?
So with the segmental reflex, the processing just occurs in the same segment of the spinal cord, the same level. Like, so the sensory information comes in, you know, let's say it's T1, right? The T1 spinal cord segment. So the sensory information comes in on T1, and then it synapses with the integrating system, and then the motor neuron is also at T1 and sends the information out.
So it stays in that same.
Stays in the same segment, doesn't go up or down. So if you're intersegmental one though, then there's going to have to be some movement through the spinal cord. So we see that, I didn't give you an example of it, but we see that sometimes. So like, let's say, you know, we're talking about like the stretch reflexes, right? And we have that reciprocal inhibition. So you do your patellar reflex and your quadriceps are going to twitch, but then you have to relax your hamstrings. But your hamstrings are controlled by a different spinal cord segment. So in order to relax your hamstrings, the integration has to go from, you know, one, like from like L4 down to L5 or something like that. So now we're using more than one spinal cord segment, so we're calling it an intersegmental reflex.
Okay. And definitely know the reflex arc.
Yes, if you were to only study one thing in reflexes, it would be the reflex arc.
Okay. There was a lot of slides for the special senses. Is there anything in particular that you think we should study more than everything else?
So, I mean, I think that the important thing is understanding how each sense works. And so that's kind of like understanding the modality. You know, like we have two chemical senses. Those are straightforward enough. It's the other three that are, of course, a lot more involved. So you kind of have to look at how, what's being sensed and how it's being sensed. And I think that that's the most important part.
Okay. I think somebody asked if we have one more exam before the final.
Yeah, I've been answering on the text.
Okay, I just saw that.
Maybe it was easier. So yeah, we're gonna have one more exam. That way, when we take the cumulative final, it's on like level ground, to say. And I'm gonna have a final review that Monday before the final exam, so that we can cover any questions based on, you know, previous stuff. But we can worry about that later.
we have until tomorrow to complete the exam, or?
Yeah, so it'll go live tonight, but it'll be available through tomorrow. And honestly, if you're still studying for it, I would study today and then take the exam tomorrow. Because we didn't talk about this a lot, even though it's relevant, but we do process when we sleep what we learn. And we also, most of us are at our most functional right after we wake up. So since we have these options as far as scheduling, if your schedule allows for it, you should, do your final studying today and then sleep on it, and then, take the exam first thing in the morning, or, whenever you wake up. No judgment, just saying. But as kind of the first functional thing you do for the day. That's going to give you your best shot of like thinking clearly through the exam.
Yeah.
But it'll go live tonight, probably about 6 o'clock. So that if you need to take it today and you can't take it tomorrow, you can. And it'll be the exact same format as last time. All right, anybody else have conceptual type questions? Anything else about the material that could benefit from being explained again?
I'm good. Let's just review today.
Yep. I think if it's always good to do one more review. And like I said, if you've got the time, finish your studying today, sleep on it, take the test tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then on Wednesday, we will start talking about the digestive system.
Okay. Well, I think I'm done. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too. Anybody else have questions? If not, we are done for the day. Thank you, Ramon. All right. You can always email me if you have questions later. And if not, I will see everybody on Wednesday.